Salbona once again, Pastor Calvin Sauls, good to be with you as we continue this two-part series around L.E.A.P living. We had an awesome conversation last week and really appreciate how you guys engaged in it and how you were present, with us as we all kind of come together to try and figure out, what we need to be about for such a time as this. So thank you guys so much. We're heading into part 2 right now, L.E.A.P living, living every day aware of purpose. We're doing this because February, African American Heritage Month, was L.E.A.P month. We had an extra day, and then we are in this L.E.A.P here, which only comes around, I believe, every 4 years or so. And so L.E.A.P here certainly has been turned upside down because of COVID-19, which has not just reached our shores, but certainly has impacted the entire world. I was born and raised in South Africa. Certainly there is not just a national state of emergency in South Africa, but the entire country is on lockdown. And so we send prayers to all of our sisters and brothers around the world. Now is the time for solidarity, transnational solidarity on this, and not stigma. Now is the time to see how we can come together to organize and mobilize whatever resources we have to make sure that we all are able to leap beyond COVID-19 and live life to the fullest. As I shared with you in part 1, the two aspects around L.E.A.P living was alignment and fulfillment. Today I want to share with you two additional ones, which is enlightenment and commitment. Before I do that, as promised, I want to give you your Tuesday tune-up. There we go, Tuesday tune-up. And I want to use a scripture coming out of 2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 6. This is the Apostle Paul writing to his mentee Timothy, who was going through a crisis. Could have been a personal crisis, it could have been a leadership crisis, but Timothy is going through a time of uncertainty, a time of doubt, a time of vulnerability. And Paul writes to him, and Paul says to Timothy these words, and these words will be our Tuesday tune-up. He writes, he says, Timothy, God did not give you a spirit of fear. Instead, God gave you a spirit of power, God gave you a spirit of love, and God gave you a spirit of sound mind. I use this as a Tuesday tune-up because as we find ourselves in the middle of COVID-19, we know that there has been a lot of fear out there. And fear, can either paralyze you or it can mobilize you. I do believe there's something like healthy fear. Healthy fear that mobilizes you. It mobilizes you to be more aware. It mobilizes you to get yourself organized. It mobilizes you to get your act together. It mobilizes you to, take some more risks. It mobilizes you to see, how you can evaluate what you've been doing so that you can elevate what you need to do, right? So, so fear can be not just a stabilizing factor for many of us, but it can also be a mobilizing factor. And that's the kind of fear that I hope that we will embrace during this time so that we can bring together faith and facts to deal with whatever negative and destructive fear is out there. But Paul writes to Timothy, and he gives Timothy, I believe, 3 very, very important tools in his arsenal of how, I believe, to engage in L.E.A.P living. He says God gave you, Timothy, the spirit of power. I said in the first part that you and I have the power to be the parable in this pandemic. We are not powerless during this time. We do have power to make sound decisions. We do have power to adhere to the recommendations around sanitizing sanitizing surfaces, to engage around safe physical distancing, to engage around gathering in small groups. And so we have the power to make decisions and to engage in behavior that will indeed allow us to move beyond COVID-19. He goes on, he says, God gave you, Timothy, a spirit of love. If we allow love to lead the way, there won't be room for any stigma. See, when love leads the way, there's no room for prejudice. When love leads the way, there is no room to engage in discrimination. When love leads the way, in fact, help me out, Billy Porter, when love is the category, right, we can be both compassionate and courageous during this time. So Paul writes to Timothy and he says to Timothy, God gave you a spirit of love. Now is the time to see how we can slow down, right, and step up in love. Looking out for folk, reaching out to folk, making connections that we've never made before, and to try and see how love and light can emanate from us during this time of darkness and this time of vulnerability. And then he says, Timothy, God gave you a spirit of sound mind. And this is going to pick up, you see, on the third aspect of L.E.A.P living. A sound mind invites us to see how we can embrace self-discipline, how we can make room for reason, how we can examine facts. I've always believed that, the kind of faith that Jesus invites us into, the kind of faith that God invites us into, whatever faith you profess, is not a faith that invites us to kind of, shut down our brains. It's not a faith that invites us to minimize intellectual engagement, right? That's what Paul is saying to Timothy. God gave you a sound mind. You got to think about this. You gotta engage in intellectual discourse around this, because the work of spirit and the work of our minds, the work of our souls, all of that are two sides of the same coin. And so I don't believe it is a coincidence that Paul writes to Timothy and says to Timothy, God gave you a spirit of sound mind, of love, and of power. I believe that those three pieces, as part of our Tuesday tune-up, invites us to see how we can continue to engage in L.E.A.P living. That third aspect now of L.E.A.P living, in addition to alignment and fulfillment, as I mentioned, is enlightenment. Enlightenment invites us to see how we can live our lives in such a way that we are constant explorers, ongoing explorers of how we can broaden our horizons. I mean, that's why I like this phrase, awesome. When we talk about God is awesome, it's because God is so big that we can be at awe at who God is, what God is about all the time. And so faith does not invite us to conquer God's character. Faith invites us to explore God's character. Faith doesn't invite us just to mere knowledge of God, but faith invites us to a deep understanding of who this God is. That's what enlightenment is for me. It is inviting us into a movement to see how we can engage in reason and in intellectual engagement. Just because Jesus saved your soul doesn't mean that you have to give up your mind, right? So, as the song says, now and then you got to check your mind, right? Because we always must look for ways to see how we can experience enlightenment, how we can continue to grow ourselves so that we can realize that yes, we do have opportunities to bridge science and religion, to bridge science and religion around how God is with us in a dynamic an evolving world. That's what progress is all about. And so, we'll talk some more about enlightenment, as we come together this evening, as part of our some more presentation, as well as some more conversation and comments from you guys. But if you want to live every day aware of purpose, become a student. Become a student of looking for ways to always broaden your horizons. So it ain't just enough to be on the go. I believe we must be on the grow on an ongoing basis. That's what enlightenment is all about. The final aspect of L.E.A.P living is commitment. And so there you have it. All four of them. The first one, alignment. The second one, fulfillment. The third one, enlightenment. And then the final one is commitment. Now you can be cool with, down with, have it all together in all of the first three that I mentioned. But if you don't make up your mind to make a commitment, yes, I did say commitment. That's the big C word, y'all. Commitment. If you don't make a commitment, then alignment, fulfillment, and enlightenment is an exercise in futility. L.E.A.P living invites us to see how it is that we can make a commitment. And a commitment is not just a one-time decision, you see. Commitment is a state or quality of being dedicated to a person, a people, a place, a cause, or an activity. That means it is an ongoing decision you got to make as you continue to evaluate, as you continue to elevate, and then evaluate again, and then elevate again. Yes, I'm talking about that spiritual. Every round goes higher and higher and higher. And it is punctuated by evaluation for elevation as we continue to do the work that God is calling us to do. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight as we dig a little deeper into enlightenment and commitment to see how it is that for this leap year we can be courageous enough, we can be audacious enough to engage in L.E.A.P living. Yes, in the midst of this pandemic called COVID-19, we can still engage in L.E.A.P living. Why? Because God has a purpose for our lives. God has a purpose for your life. And God is inviting you to see how you can live every day aware of that purpose that God has given you. Looking forward to going deeper tonight, as well as to have your questions and your comments as we continue to leap.